oil consumption, engine knocking, lack of acceleration. Those are all common issues with the 6.6 liter gas V8 in the Chevy 2500. And today we're gonna dive in and see what the heck's going on. We're back with the 6.6 liter V8 in this nice little silver Chevy 2500. Honestly, again, I've mentioned many times, the front end, I just don't like the look of them. But the rest of the truck, good looking truck. I love these steps here. Even Ford has now copied them. Bumper steps, they've been here for a while. But today we are concerned with what is underneath the hood here. And oh Jesus, that is a dirty engine bay right there. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Last week I was out playing with this 6.6 liter V8. I was towing 14,000 pounds. I thought it worked pretty good, to be honest. But if you guys want to see this engine in action with a load on it, I'll put a link down in the description or a box up here somewhere. But today I want to dive into this engine and talk more about some issues, as well as just some things that I would be concerned about if I was thinking about buying this 6.6 liter gas engine. So jumping right into it, by far the number one issue that is, I guess, in my opinion, stirring up the most attention is oil consumption with this 6.6 liter V8. And well, I've heard both sides of the spectrum, if you will. I've heard owners who have never burnt any oil from day one, and I've also heard owners who are putting in over a quart of oil, every 1,000 miles or so. So quite a bit of oil burning. And well, I kind of want to dive into it and then maybe talk about why there are different results for different people. Now, since there seems to be some discrepancy, I figured we use this 6.6 as a good test pilot. I was just towing 14,000 pounds with this thing for 2 hours, literally about an hour ago. I know the videos are a week apart, but this thing was just on the road towing. And this truck is also a rental truck with 66,000 kilometers on it. So this thing has probably been abused from day one, making it a prime candidate for burning oil. Oh, these things are tall trucks. Well, moment of truth here. Nope, she's right up to the full mark. So this thing has not burned oil. The reason why I think this is such a big issue is because GM just settled, I think it was like over $100 million lawsuit about oil consumption on their 5.3 V8, I believe from years 2011 to 2014. So this is not a new issue for GM, and I think this is why this is getting a little bit more traction than I think it normally would. GM has recognized there is an issue here, and in 2022, they released a service bulletin regarding oil consumption for the 6.6 liter gas V8. And there's some interesting stuff on here I want to go through. Firstly, GM doesn't recognize these engines as broken in until after 5,000 miles or 8,000 kilometers. That's the first little interesting tidbit there. Secondly is how much oil consumption they consider normal after that braking period. They say 1 quart per 1,000 miles is acceptable. And to me, that is just not acceptable, especially on a new engine. If you're burning that much oil, there clearly is some kind of issue. The alleged reason why engine oil is getting burnt is firstly because of the piston rings allowing oil to get up into the combustion chamber. The oil control rings apparently are not seating or sealing as they should on certain engines. The second reason is the PCV is potentially allowing oil to come back and around in the intake and then getting burned in the combustion chamber as well. So those are the two alleged reasons why engine oil does seem to be getting burnt on these engines. First thing I want to mention is GM correctly points out on that service bulletin, you should always let the engine sit for 15 minutes after it's running to truly correctly check the oil. If you fire this thing up and let it run and then you just let it sit for 30 seconds, check the oil, there could be up to like half a liter of engine oil up in the engine. And that oil has to kind of drip down, get back down to the pan to get a true accurate reading. Every engine does burn some oil, but ideally on a new engine like this, between oil change services, you should really not notice any oil missing, ideally. GM, once again, does correctly point out that if you are towing a lot with this engine is revving a lot, high RPMs, also high oil temperature, those can all lead to faster oil loss. I do want to touch on the temperature thing because higher oil temperatures will tend to oxidate oil quicker, and GM does point that out in the service bulletin correctly. And so if you guys are burning oil, a good first solution would be to just change your engine oil to an engine oil, a good high quality engine oil that has a lot of oxidation inhibitors in it. AMSOIL comes to mind. That would be the first thing I would do if my engine was starting to burn some oil. Another important thing, and what I would want to do if I bought this engine brand new, is make sure that you follow the break-in procedure. I believe it's like 500 miles. It's nothing crazy, but it's going to allow the engine to properly seat the piston rings against the cylinder walls. As we just mentioned, one of the alleged concerns is that the piston rings, the oil control ring, is not doing its job properly. If you didn't follow it, it's really not the end of the world, but if you can have the opportunity to follow that break-in procedure, I would highly recommend it. Now, thirdly, I would not want to follow the oil life intervals. I personally would want to change my oil every 5,000 miles or so. If you're changing your oil, around 8, 9, 10,000 miles, you're just kind of asking for problems. And the fourth thing I would recommend is to hold off on towing as long as you can. GM themselves doesn't recognize these engines as fully broken in until after 5,000 miles. I know the break-in procedure says after 500 miles, you can tow with these engines, and I'm sure you can, but if you can hold off, I would. Because I think it's just going to really help to fully break that engine in before you put a load on it and hopefully really seat those piston rings. So oil consumption is the #1 issue, and I guess the silver lining is that it's not really a catastrophic problem. You more or less just need to keep the oil topped up as the truck runs. Now, the second issue I want to talk about is the consequences of running a direct fuel injection system. Now, this 6.6 liter V8 is a direct fuel injection engine, just like every other V8 Chevy puts in their pickup trucks. And that's great for stuff like throttle response, fuel economy, you can make more power, higher compression ratios. So there are a big list of benefits. Now, there is one consequence, and that is the carboning up of the intake and intake valve. And what this can do, it basically just slowly starts to restrict airflow into the intake. First of all, resulting in loss of power, rough idling, and even going as far as misfires. Now, this issue won't affect new trucks. It takes years for that carbon to really truly build up on the intake and start to take effect. So if you're buying this truck to have for 4 or 5 years, personally, I wouldn't really worry about this. But if you're looking to buy this engine for long term, odds are you're going to have to deal with some kind of carbon cleaning if you want to keep the engine for a long time. And the only way to clean the carbon out of your intake is to pretty much do it manually. And that usually ends up being quite a bit of a bigger job. If I was going to be buying this engine, it's something I would want to know that down the line there is real potential that I would have to sink some good money into cleaning the intake out. Whereas a traditional injection engine or a port injection engine is something you would not have to worry about, something like the 6.4 HEMI. In a perfect world, GM would implement a dual injection fuel system, so you have your direct injection as well as a port injection, so you get the benefits of direct injection, but you also have the port injection to clean the intake, clean the carbon off, so you don't get the downside of direct injection either. And I talked about this before. Ford has done it, Toyota has done it with what seems to be successful implementation of dual injection fuel systems. So oil consumption and carbon buildup would be my #1 and #2 things I would be concerned about when buying this engine. But overall, this engine, in my opinion, is very well built. It's just a traditional V8. It's got a good strong bottom end. It's a cast iron block. You got great strength. So aside from those two problems, this is a really, really solid engine. So just keep that in mind as we go down the list here. The third leader with the 6.6 liter gas V8s is a little bit of a mystery. It's engine knocking or metallic ping that quite a few people seem to hear randomly at idle or even when driving. And it seems like even the dealerships are sometimes a little bit confused at what is causing this metallic pinging or knocking noises. I was reading a story about a gentleman who brought his truck in with the metallic pinging, knocking noise, and I believe the dealership replaced some main bearings, some lifters, did all that work, and yet the truck was still making that metallic pinging noise. So it's an interesting issue, and it's a little bit of a mystery all at the same time. What I personally think what people may be hearing is, well, first of all, we have a direct fuel injection system in here, which means you have a high pressure pump as well as some higher pressure fuel injectors. And sometimes those injectors can become a little noisy, a little chirpy. You can even be hearing the pump, some noise in the pump could be causing that pinging, that metallic sound. So I think that's a viable option. The second thing, which I think is probably more likely, is you're hearing a little bit of a fuel knock, a fuel ping, because of the low octane fuel. Let me explain. So the 6.6 liter can use 87 octane fuel, and I imagine 99% of people are putting 87 octane fuel in here, as would I. But what I find interesting is the compression ratio on this engine. The compression ratio is 10.8 to 1, almost 11 to 1. And if we look at the 6.2 liter engine in the Chevy 1500s, its compression ratio is 11.5 to 1. Now on that engine, you have to use 91 octane fuel because of that compression ratio, so you don't get fuel knock or that fuel pinging because of that low octane fuel. So I would be very suspicious of low octane fuel causing that knocking. And if you do have a weird pinging, knocking noise, try running a tank of 91 octane and see if that kind of clears that up or not. Having an almost 11 to 1 compression ratio in this engine is relatively high, and being able to run 87 octane, which is a relatively low octane fuel, I think could lead to some fuel detonation in the cylinder. Basically the compression alone causes the fuel to ignite, not the spark plug. That's fuel detonation causing a knocking or pinging noise. Either way, it does seem to be a little bit of a mystery, but again, the silver lining of this is that 99% of people who experience this knocking have no engine issues. It's just more of this annoyance, and I think it kind of scares people because like they want to make sure it's not a lifter failing or it's not, you know, a bottom end knock, potential engine bearing failing. So I think that's why people are searching about it, wondering what the heck this noise is, when it could simply just be either direct injection fuel noise or just running low octane fuel. Now, obviously, if you guys are hearing some kind of engine knock, mysterious engine noise, I would always bring the truck into the dealership if it's under warranty, obviously, because you never know. It could be a lifter, it could be something else. No engine is perfect, and you know, engine failures happen all the time. So if you are hearing something weird, doesn't hurt to bring it to the dealer. Well, those are the 3 issues that I want to talk about, but it's time for the bonus issue, which I find a little bit funny, and that is people complaining about lack of power, lack of acceleration out of this 7,000 pound truck. I guess I shouldn't say I find it funny, but I mean, I've driven this truck before. I towed with it a couple hours ago. There is some good power coming to this engine. There's some pretty solid pull coming out of it. It's not a race car by any means, but to complain that it's lack of acceleration, I mean, it's, you know, it's a detuned workhorse of an engine. It's not meant to be quick. I get it because, you know, the V8s in the 1500s tend to be pretty freaking quick. The 5.7 HEMI, the Ram 1500s, is a very fast truck. The EcoBoosts are quite quick. And this thing, you'd think with that big burly V8 in the front would be a quick truck as well, but it's just really not meant for that. And well, I guess the 6-speed transmission does not help. Thankfully, GM has at least listened and acknowledged that the 6-speed transmission is not helping their case, and they're going to be putting a 10-speed transmission behind this engine, which I think is going to make a huge difference in terms of, well, at least this complaint, people talking about lack of acceleration. Having those extra gears is just going to make this engine come to life, feel that much more peppy, and all that fun stuff. So I do somewhat kind of, you know, find it humorous when people say, you know, their 2500 HD truck isn't fast enough. I guess at the end of the day, the big thing is, does it pull when there's a load behind it? And I can confirm with 14,000 pounds behind this truck, it does pull that load. And lastly, the predecessor to this engine, the 6-liter, which used to be in these 2500, 3500 as the gasser option, those things were completely gutless. This is a huge step up from that engine. So I guess, you know, in terms of acceleration, I wouldn't really call that an issue. I would just say that it is a workhorse of an engine. It'll get you from A to B with a load behind it, which is probably what you want if you're buying this type of truck anyways. Well, those are the 3 issues that caught my eye with this 6.6 liter gas V8 in the Chevy 2500 platform, with a little bit of a bonus there in terms of the acceleration. Well, those are the 3 major issues that caught my eye with the 6.6 liter gas V8 in the Chevy 2500 lineup, and well, threw in a little bonus there for you guys. But as always, let me know what you think. If you own one of these trucks, if you agree with this, if you don't, let me know. Always love reading those comments. But if you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe, because, well, we'd love to have you guys on board. Anyways, enough of me. I'm gonna go home, drink a beer, and we'll see you next week on the channel.